And so when he found out he was going to be working for me, he was completely flipped out. Like, oh my God, I can't do this. And he came into my office and he says, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm leaving. And he got up and he left. He literally walked out of the building and he did not come back for 3 days.
Wow.
And so I was getting a lot of pressure from HR, from my boss, to say, look, you got to fire the guy. You can't just have people walking out of the building like this and not coming back for days. Like, you've got to just fire him. You have every right to. And I'm like, yes, I have every right to.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. I'm your host, Limor Bergman, and my guest today is Ann Bulluck. Karen was the first woman promoted to executive vice president at AM Best Company. She sat on the board, and then she took away from all of it to write novels, fiction about women leaders, and the ethical dilemmas that never make it to a leadership book. And in the conversation, we talk about the gap between who you are inside and who you perform at work, and why we're all trained to stuff our emotions down and what it actually means to trust yourself. And here's a hint for you. It was never about being certain you won't make a mistake. If you have ever felt like you had to become someone else to be taken seriously, I want to invite you to listen to this episode. So are you ready? Let's dive right in. Yeah, so for those who don't know, Karen wrote 3 books, right? Mm-hmm. Which I actually find very interesting, the idea of writing business books, but they're fiction.
Yes.
So tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, it's really interesting how that came about because I was in business. I was in corporate for many years. When I left corporate, I was an executive vice president and on the board and, all of that stuff. And I left because I really wanted to help women in the workplace, particularly women leaders. And I became a coach and I was doing some coaching and I wanted to write a book about women's leadership and maybe how to do it a little bit differently other than just copying the guys, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started writing that and it was awful. I mean, I was bored with it. And I was like, okay, if I'm bored with this, everybody else is going to be bored with this. So I just kind of put it on the back burner and said, all right, I'm just going to, I have to think about this more because I don't know how I want to write this. And then one day I was out for a walk and I sort of envisioned or heard or saw this scene in my head of this woman at her first board meeting and trying to not agreeing with the direction that everybody on the board was going, but not sure, okay, do I disrupt this? Do I say what I think? Do I just go along so that, I'm not, this is my first board meeting. What do I do? And that was really interesting to me. And I thought, okay, let me do something with this. So I went home, I wrote it down, and that eventually became the prologue of the first book in the series, Discovering Power, because that was sort of the start. And I thought, in fiction, I can really talk about the emotions behind what people are thinking and feeling, give different perspectives, which I really love, because we're not one-dimensional people. We have have different ideas, and there's no one right way to do things. And the other thing is, I thought I could explore some creative solutions to things that maybe, would inspire people to think about things differently, rather than just say, this is how you do it. Just create some inspiration. So that's how the fiction's born.
There's no one way to do things, and the first book is about finding voice, right, and mm-hmm. learning role boundaries. And I think this is especially difficult for women, especially in boardrooms or in very male-dominant rooms. How to find your voice and how to be different, how to be you.
Yeah. Yes.
So share a little bit from your book and your character there. How
Well,
does she?
I think Cheryl is the main character, and I think she has a lot of the concerns about it that women do. Um, well, am I going to be seen as weak? As I'm going to be seen as overly emotional? And honestly, her in the first book, her husband labels her as over emotional and tells her,
Wow.
you need to knock this stuff off,
Yeah.
and because. And I think that's a fear that a lot of women have. I'm going to be seen as weak and emotional and be labeled and be dismissed because I'm not, you know, focused only on the bottom line, or I'm not, going along with how everybody else thinks things should be done. And Cheryl in the first book, Discovering Power, really struggles with that. She really has to question herself, and she doesn't always get support from her husband or from other people in her life because she wants to say something different. And then she asks herself, should I leave? Right? Is this not for me? And I have found in my career as a coach, a lot of women have chosen to leave corporate versus trying to stand up for things, which is hard. So I'm not blaming them for that, but I think it's a big loss to corporate.
And what's your take on that? If a woman struggle with those thoughts, should I leave? Should I stay? Should I stand up for myself? Should I fight this battle or not? Or give up?
Yeah, and I think that those are all individual choices. But for me personally, I always feel like if I don't at least try to do something, what do you have to lose? If you're thinking about leaving anyway and you're trying something, okay, I
Yeah.
guess you could lose that you could get fired and that would create problems. And that might, I guess that's always a possibility of an outcome. But it's a pretty extreme one. And I think there are smaller steps you can take along the way to test the waters and see how do I do things differently. Um, and experiment in the environment. Not all environments, there are some environments you have to leave. I'm not, I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think there's a lot more environments where you can experiment and explore and make small changes. You don't have to do everything at once.
Yeah. Any examples of what experiment can look like?
Well, I think there's a couple of very small ones in the book, but there's one that was really it was interesting because it was based on an experience that I had in corporate. So I had an experience where I had an employee who was moved from one department into my department, and he was going to report to me, and his boss and I honestly were not getting along at the time for a lot of different reasons, and she basically told him all these crazy stories about me. And so when he found out he was going to be working for me, he was completely flipped out. Like, oh my God, I can't do this. And he came into my office and he says, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm leaving. And he got up and he left. He literally
Oh,
walked
wow.
out of the building, and he did not come back for 3 days.
Wow.
And so I was getting a lot of pressure from HR, from my boss, to say, look, you got to fire the guy. You can't just have people walking out of the building like this and not coming back for days. Like, you've got to just fire him. You have every right to. And I'm like, yes, I have every right to, but let's just give this a little bit time. Let's see what we'll just mark him out on vacation, and let's just see what comes out. So after 3 days, he came back. We had a really good conversation. He decided to stay. Honestly, we became very good friends. Not only did we have a good working relationship, he actually even came to my retirement party which was pretty exciting. So we had a great relationship, and it was a really fun, it ended up being a good situation. And everybody afterwards said, okay, well, you were right. But, if I had listened to conventional wisdom there, we would have fired him, and we would have lost somebody who really made a good contribution for the next, I don't know, 5-7 years. I mean, he stayed for a while after that. Cheryl faces a similar situation in the book. So
Mm-hmm.
I changed obviously the situation, but, and I've had people say to me, flat out, well, that would never work, that would never work in an organization. I'm like, well, it did work in an organization.
Yeah.
But that's kind of sometimes the little things that you can see. And if an organization doesn't allow you the leeway as a manager or as a leader to do some of those things, then you maybe do ask the question, it's time to leave and find someplace else. But for me, that was like a little stake in the ground. For Cheryl, it's also a little stake in the ground to say, okay, let's try to change things so that we're taking people's emotions a little bit more into consideration here. I mean, this person was really upset, and the person that Cheryl's dealing with is really upset for good reasons. So let's see if we can work with them.
I think there is a hesitant, or I don't know, I guess even not even hesitant, but people are afraid to face emotions in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Including our own.
Yeah. And we have to address them, right? I mean, if someone is upset, or even they may not say anything, but we just see it on their face, right? Something is going on, and we don't address it. It's just gonna get worse.
It does. It festers, right? Even with our own emotions, when we just stuff them down and ignore them, which is basically what we're taught to do in the corporate world,
Yeah.
Just be tough and move on. You stuff them down and it does get worse. It creates a disconnect. I think that's really, and that's actually one of the bigger themes of the whole series, that disconnect between who you are inside, what your real values are, what your real personality is, what your emotions are, and who you are being or being forced to be on the outside. And that disconnect creates that internal conflict that it really just kills us all. I mean, it really just kills us all.
You raised something that I want to touch on, Karen. So I just had a client, last week that I talked to, and we had a discussion about exactly this. Like, she's stepping into leadership, and she has this perception that she needs to be someone else when she's a leader. And I told her, absolutely not. It's like, I was a little bit maybe, I said, I really believe that we need to bring ourselves to anything that we do. And if there's a disconnect, like you mentioned, right? If we are playing a role, we are trying to be something like a character.
Yeah.
Trying to play a character. Oh, as a manager, I need to be strict. I need to be serious. To set boundaries. And we don't let ourselves to be us. First of all, it's really difficult and frustrating and tolling on us. And then, it's going to blow up in our face. It's not going to work. What can I say?
You're so right. I mean, I was talking about this with someone else the other day, and we were doing it in the context, honestly, of the third book of the series, which talks about trust. But I think that, that's, again, part of the overarching theme is when you're so disconnected with yourself, you don't trust yourself, and other people aren't going to trust you. Because it becomes apparent in different ways that you're playing a role. Now, are there certain, to use your word, boundaries around how we play roles, and when we're in different positions, do we need to tweak our behavior a little bit and maybe have different sets of boundaries? Yes, there's no doubt about that. But that's completely different than tying yourself up in knots by being somebody different.
Definitely. It's a balancing game that you need to play with being yourself and still sometimes setting boundaries. And as a leader, because I'm very open and transparent person, and it was very difficult for me as I grew as a leader to sometimes I had to mask things. I couldn't share things with people.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. And you know what I did? I used to tell people, listen, there are things I just cannot share. I just say it out loud. So at least there wasn't an elephant in the room. I just say it. I can't.
Yeah, and
share.
I used to do the same thing, because that is the hard when there are things that you just can't share. And there are things you really just can't share. And, yeah, I think to your point, naming it and saying, look, yeah, there's something going on here, but I really can't talk about it.
And how do you set the fine line, the boundaries when you're in leadership to, okay, I'm not your friend. I cannot be lovey-dovey and like the coolest person, with everyone. But still, I want to be me. I want to have fun. I want to have friendships. I don't want everything to be just transactional and so serious. What's your take on that? How did you balance that?
I honestly had a very hard time balancing that. That was something that I struggled with, because I kind of went down the road where I have to be serious. Now, what I found though is different people respond to that differently, and I think ultimately that's where I ended up learning over time, is there were some people that I could be more friendly with and more open with and have more of a friendship with. And then there were other people that I needed to keep things more formal.
Yeah.
And I think a lot depended on the individual and what they needed. And I also learned, there were some people I had to protect myself with because they were people that were going to take advantage of.
That's true.
Of things. So it was a combination of trying to meet people where they were and meet their needs and what they needed from a leader and from a boss. But it was also, okay, here's somebody, if we cross boundaries here, they're not going to be able to honor the boundaries and they're going to take advantage of things. So it's a balancing act. And to me, it really comes down to working, one-on-one with the people you're working with.
And getting to know them.
Yeah. And what they need.
This is one of the challenging things that, especially when we get into remote and hybrid, we don't know the people enough, right? It used to be so simple. You go to the office, hang out with people. I'm thinking even about my parents' generation. They work with the same people the entire career.
Yeah.
So they knew those people. Nowadays, people switch jobs. So you have to kind of make an effort to get to know people.
It is. I agree with you. It's a lot more difficult today with the remote work, with the pressures of getting things done, with people changing jobs. I mean, I was fortunate. I worked with the same people for a lot of my career. And I knew them. I knew them well. But I also had the opportunity most of my career to go in and, sit down in their office and say, hey, what's going on? Make that like just drive-by visit.
Yeah.
And with the remote work, you've got to be intentional about doing that. You've got to be intentional about setting up time or just, pinging someone and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? And just do a check-in. It doesn't have to be formal. And I think it's better if it's not formal. And I think that's part of the problem with remote work. Almost everything ends up being formal.
Yeah, because it's a meeting on your calendar. It's not just you walk in the corridor, you meet someone in the coffee break.
Right.
And you just chat. You have to schedule something.
Yep.
I had a fight with one of the engineers that worked with me. He didn't want to do one-on-ones, because a lot of times engineers, they don't like meetings and formalities. So he was like to the extreme. He just didn't want to meet with me. And I told him, like, you know what? You have to show up for at least 5 minutes. I'm just going to check what's going on. And if everything is cool, that's it. What do you say about that? So I was forcing him to check in with me for 5 minutes every week. It was hilarious.
There are people that don't like that, and then there are people that crave that.
Yeah, that's true.
There are people that want that half hour on your calendar every week.
There are people that will want more than half an hour, and you have to put it your time.
Well, yeah, that's true. It was always interesting to me who wanted meetings, who didn't want meetings, whether they were one-on-one group meetings, those dynamics were always really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, but I would say definitely, I would echo what you said about you have to be intentional when you work with people remote and spend the time with them, try to know them, understand their motivations, understand what they're passionate about, what they like, what they don't like, what are their aspirations, a little bit about their life.
Yeah.
As much as they're willing to share, just to get to know them.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing about remote is really steering the conversation to what their life is like. I mean, like in the office, it's pretty easy to say, hey, what are you doing this weekend, right? But when you're talking to somebody remotely, there's a formality around that doesn't often lend itself to that kind of conversation.
And my strategy is I start sharing. Yeah. Usually. And even with, I would say something that maybe coaches will disagree with me. So I'm a coach. And according to the ICF, or at least coaches that I talk to, you have to be asking questions and you're not sharing too much about yourself. And I think, excuse me for my language, this is BS.
I agree 100%, which is why I never got my ICF certification, because I'm like, okay, this is, yeah.
So yes. You know what I do? I share. I share, hey, I live here, I'm married, I have 4 children. We talk a little bit about, family. Yeah. Today I had a coaching call with a client and we talked about the war and how he lives with his in-laws and, how he's handling the situation. And I'm just, with my son in the military. So yes, you have to have those kind of interactions because that's how you build, and we go into trust. That's how you build trust.
It is. And you do have to share, and you do have to, I think there's two big reasons. One is, we share stories and that's how we connect with one another. Again, which is another reason that I wrote my books in the form of stories. And the other thing is that we need to know what's going on in other people's lives. Even people need to know what's going on in your life as a leader, because we can't keep, there are people that are very good at keeping things compartmentalized, but most of us, one spills over into the other. And when there's something big going on in our personal lives, we may not exactly be the same in the office. And that's okay. But sometimes you need to say, hey, I have something going on in my personal life. You share as much as is appropriate. And that makes you real. It makes people understand, okay, Karen might be a little cranky this week because of this going on. And, we understand, right? It creates that connection, and it creates an openness to be able to navigate those emotions we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And I want to touch base on trusting yourself, because this is one of the things that I see again and again with my clients, with my female client. They don't trust themselves.
Yeah.
You don't think they're, they don't trust their instincts. They question themselves. That's where I usually come in and help them. But share a little bit, maybe from your book or from your experience. How can a woman, start building trust with herself?
That is a great question.
I know, a hard question.
It is a hard question because, again, I saw it over and over in my coaching clients as well when I was coaching. And I know I went through this myself. Part of it is, again, it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the emotions, where we're taught not to trust our emotions, that we're rational human beings. And if it's not rational, it's not valid. Well, today's world, we're learning that we are way more than rational people, and that our emotions play a big part in who we are as human beings, in our creativity, in our problem-solving abilities, in all of those things. I mean, if we just want to be rational, then we're all going to be replaced by AI. right?
That's
Because
true.
AI supposedly is purely rational, which, that's a whole other story. But honestly, it's part of the story in embracing trust is what we trust with AI and what we trust with ourselves. But in the story of embracing trust, which is the third book in the series and the most recent one, there are three women that are all faced with situations where they have to decide, do I trust myself to make these decisions? And in one case, one of the women makes a decision to move, to change jobs. And then she trusts herself to say, okay, I'm gonna make this decision. And then she finds out that, okay, now who do I trust in this environment? And can I trust this new environment? And now I've made a bad decision, right? Potentially. She's saying, okay, did I make the wrong, all of a sudden, did I make the wrong decision in changing jobs? And that's another thing that I think is a big problem with people not trusting themselves, is they think if they make a mistake or they make the wrong decision, that therefore they are not trustworthy, right? Yeah. We all make mistakes. And I think one of the biggest steps and one of the things that two of the women in embracing trust have to deal with are, I've made a mistake. What do I do about it? And trusting ourselves ultimately is not about trusting that we're never going to make a mistake. It's trusting that we're resilient enough to be able to fix it, or to be able to resolve it, or to be able to move on after we have made a mistake. And I think one of the things that people always, that women in particular think, if I trust myself, then that means I can never make a mistake.
There's not such thing as never making a mistake.
Of course there's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a practice. I always tell the women that I coach, you have to practice it.
Yeah.
Practice just going with your instincts, trusting, as you said, like the emotions, what you feel should be done. Mm-hmm. We have it. A lot of times we feel it in our gut. This is what I should be doing. So
Absolutely.
Trust yourself, that you know what's best for you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, tell us about the books. Where can our listeners find them and how they can connect with you?
Well, the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, or you can connect with me on my website, which is daringtotranscend.com. That's sort of my brand, Daring to Transcend. The books are available on Amazon. I believe they are available on most other places where you can buy books as well. Barnes & Noble and, other places.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's been a pleasure having you here today.
It's been a delightful conversation, as always. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you so much for listening to the episode. I hope it was valuable for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform and share it with any woman who needs to hear it. And I'll see you next week. Bye.